paintings, everything should all be part of this, what people think of as art. And some are objects, some are flat, as in paintings and that, and quote unquote fine art with the paintings and sculpture. But all these other things hold their own in them. And I felt like there should be a show that puts all of this together. Whether it's new or old, makes no difference. But it has to be original to its intent.
I've got Kim Martindale here. He tried to do it last year. He's so doggone busy, he couldn't even get over last year. So we're here at like 7 o'clock at night in Santa Fe before a big major show that's going to open. Now, this probably won't air by that time, but you'll know about it for next year for sure. And Kim, welcome.
Well, it's great to be here. I'm glad I made it after a year of standing you up, but
I know, my God.
I'm here now, so
you
excited.
must just be exhausted, right?
It's exhausting, but it's exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I do what I do,
Yeah.
and I've done it for years because I love it.
And would you call yourself a art dealer, Indian art dealer, show promoter, and any one, all three, or one before the other?
I would say that at this point, I do a lot more of my time and energy is in show production.
Yeah, I would assume.
But the reason I'm in show production is because I'm an art dealer,
Yeah.
and I love this material. And this material led me to dealing in it, studying it, and then into show production.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all one.
Yeah.
But, at this point, many years ago, it was probably 90%, dealing and
Right.
10% show production. And then it went a little bit more the other way. And now it's probably about 90% again, show production and 10%.
And we're going to talk about that. But I want to find out a few things about you because I've known you since 1989 is I think when I first met you. And there's still a lot I don't even have a clue, like your background. So where did you grow up?
Grew up kind of all over. My dad was a principal of a school and a pastor of a church. So we grew up in Canada, is where my family is originally from.
Where
I was
about?
born in California, but my early childhood was Saskatchewan, Prairie Province. Nothing there but corn, wheat fields, and but it was a good place to grow up for the beginning years.
Right.
And then went on to Ontario, Canada, in third grade. My dad went back and got his doctorate at Stanford, so we stayed
Wow.
a year with
PhD and what?
in education.
Yeah. Wow.
In open air education. And so stayed a year with our grandparents in Ontario, and then moved down to Massachusetts for 3 years, and then out to California, where I stayed until I graduated from high school. And then college was all over, from Iowa to UCSB to Japan to China.
So when you were growing up, do you remember the first time that you Native American art really kind of go, ooh, what's this?
All my life.
The whole time?
It
Even
was-
since a little kid?
As a little kid, there's a story that I'll tell the really quick version of.
Yeah, no, we got time. This is a long format, baby.
So, okay.
There's no time limits.
Like my older sister is 10 years older than I am, Linda, who you've met at some of the shows and helps out. And my mom, we were in Canada at that time in Saskatchewan in Regina, and there was a natural history museum there, and it had a bunch of dioramas. And one of the dioramas was of Blackfoot Indians trading with the fur traders, and they were wearing these buffalo robes and a stack of buffalo hides. And I know this only because I still have a postcard of the picture of it. But as a 6-month-old kid, they put my stroller by that diorama. And I just lit up and started smiling. And then they tried to take me on to the bears or whatever was next. I just started screaming. And they were like, what's going on? And they tried to distract me and everything. I was having nothing of it. So they would just leave me there every time they would go to this museum. But I would sit in front of this diorama for like 3 hours.
Oh, my gosh.
And in those days, you could do that.
Yeah,
you know?
You probably still can in
You
Canada.
could just check back and, he's good.
He's
no
there.
problem.
He's okay. Not a problem. That's
exactly. With that accent,
yeah.
you got
I like it. Yes, sir.
So, it was great. So that was the first story that my parents and my sisters that are older than I am tell about when I was 6 months old. And then as soon as I could kind of walk, it was like any rock that had a point on it was an arrowhead. I was sure it was an arrowhead. And I would show everybody this rock with this point and go, look at the arrowhead I found, And they'd all be kind and say, oh, that's such a nice arrowhead. It had nothing to do with being an arrowhead.
Did you ever find an arrowhead?
And later in life,
You did actually find some.
But not when I was, 3, 4, 5 years old.
And so the whole time as you're growing up, you're interested in Native American stuff.
Completely interested in it.
And what kind of things were you collecting at that point? Let's say when you're in your grade school,
So at
junior
that
high.
point, there really wasn't much Native American art around. And so then there was maybe some bottles or some shells or rocks,
Right.
that kind of thing. And so by the time I was 6 years old, I named my room the Kimrarium Museum. So I put a sign on my door, because my middle name is Ray, so Kim Ray, but then Rare. And then I thought of aquarium and museum, so it was Kimrarium Museum.
Oh God, I hope you have a photograph of that somewhere.
I wish I did. But so on, whatever I could find, I was a collector.
And were you making art at all? Were you
I was
drawing
a
or
drawing.
anything?
I did draw and paint later. I painted later. My grandmother painted some. So the 7th grade summer that I went up there and spent a couple of months was the first time I actually did oil painting. And in high school, I was in a gifted program for drawing. The professor from the UCSB came to Dos Pueblos High School where I was in 9th and 10th grade, and you had to audition for it and that. And he chose 4 students out of the high school of 2,500 students.
Jeez, that's a big high
to
school.
be in this gifted program for drawing. And so I went in that program for 2 years.
Wow.
And we did live model drawing, just like almost like a university class.
And what school is that?
And it was Dos Pueblos High School in Santa Barbara.
Man, that's a fantastic school.
Yeah.
Though they needed more than 4 people probably.
Yeah.
And so when you left high school, did you think you were going to be an artist?
No, really kind of when I left high school, I had already started producing shows. I had started with Don Bennett when I was 16.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I was involved in the very first ever White Hawk show. It wasn't even called White Hawk at that point.
And so for people who don't know who Don Bennett is, so Don Bennett was like the guru of the early days of
really taking a concept.
Right.
There were lots of shows, but they were all, contemporary and a little niche of historical material involved in them. But no one did a show that was just about antique material.
Right.
And these dealers were coming over before Indian Market. It was tied completely to Indian Market at that point. And they would set up at La Posada. And Don, had a marketing background in that, and he thought, why don't we all get together instead of dealing out of trunks and, La Posada and La Fonda and that.
Do you know what year that would have been?
It would have been, I was 16, so 57 now, so 41 years ago.
Yeah, 41 years ago. So whatever that is, 1980s, 1980 probably, something like that.
So right in that time period.
And how did you meet?
No, it would have been earlier than that because I graduated in 79 and this was
so 70.
78.
You can tell we weren't mathematicians.
Yeah, so about 78 is when it was.
And so how did you meet Don?
So we were traveling around and moved around quite a bit, and I had this passion, my family, and we moved to California, to Santa Barbara. And I was going into 7th grade at that time. And as I said, I was interested in collecting, and I'd always loved American Indian, but it was so hard to find anything. Like in Canada, at some of the flea markets, you'd find a little shard or something like that, a woodland shard. I'd found a couple arrowheads on my great uncle's farm in Ontario. Moved to Massachusetts, there were rock shops, so there was a few arrowheads and that, but really no real material. Moved to Santa Barbara, opened up the Yellow Pages. In those days, there was such a thing as Yellow Pages. Yeah, right. And Mike Haskell had a shop there.
Who we're going to interview, by the way.
Oh, fantastic. Collector's Corners was another shop there. And so I was like to my parents, we have to go to these stores. So as soon as we were settled in, I just kept nagging them, and then they were very supportive of it. So they took me down to Mike Haskell's shop, and there was a little pink slip that was the Great Western Shows, and the Shirley Tapp produced them. And so it was a discount thing. And I was like, okay, to my mom and dad, this is what I want for my birthday and Christmas present. Just take me down to one of these shows. So shortly after we had moved into Santa Barbara and we'd gone to Mike Haskell's shop, then we went to one of these shows down in Los Angeles area. And I was getting all excited. I'd cut grass and babysat in that. And I had about, $95, $85, something like that in my pocket. And I was like, finally, I'm going to see all this stuff. So I went down there, and walked into the show, and there was this one booth that had all these Navajo textiles. Well, I didn't know what kind of textiles they were at that point. All these textiles there. And I was looking through the stack and everything. And this lady said, "You really like this stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, this is like a dream come true. I'm here, you know?"
Right.
And it was Grace Marsick from Chicago that's passed away a few years ago now. And her husband George was there too. But Grace was like, you know, she engaged me and so friendly and all of that. So then I continued to walk around the show, and I found this roach, this Plains roach that I really responded to. And I was like, oh, I love this piece.
And for those who don't know what a roach is, it goes on the top of your head. It's not something you smoke.
Yeah, exactly. In those days, California didn't have those lenient laws.
Right.
So I found this piece, and they wanted maybe $100 for it, and I didn't really know anything about what it's worth or whatever. And so I went back to Grace and I said, you know, I just met you, but there's this piece over there that I'm interested in. And she goes, oh, I know nothing about this, but this guy over here, Skip Gentry. Mm-hmm. So she called over Skip Gentry and said, you know, this young guy, he's interested in this piece. And so I explained the piece, and he said, well, why don't you go ask him if you could take it for just a second. So I did and brought it over, and he goes, and so Skip goes, yeah, it's a pretty nice piece. He goes, offer him $60. He'll take 60 for that. So I went back and offered him $60. He took it. I was so excited. I went back over there with my first really big purchase of American Indian art ever. And Don Bennett had returned to the booth. And I showed everybody, and they could see my excitement. And Don goes, you really like this stuff? And I said, oh, I love this stuff, you know? And he goes, you're on the wrong side of the table then.
Oh, wow.
So he said, get on this side, and I'll teach you to fold rugs. So he taught me to fold rugs, and then I worked in the booth the rest of the day. And then from that point on, like I was 12 and, you know, between 12 and 13. And every show in Los Angeles, my parents would drive me down. And then after about a year, my parents got to know Don. And what they would do is they would just drive me down on Friday and then come and pick me up on Sunday. And I'd stay at Don's. Or if there was a show in Arizona or up in Oregon or up in San Francisco, I would take a bus, or somehow my parents would take me to meet Don someplace. And then I'd go on this trip and maybe take a day off school and go to this show and help fold rugs and talk about stuff. And, you know, at that first show, Don actually went and bought me a book on American Indian baskets. And he said, read this, and the next time I see you, I'm going to quiz you on everything in the book. Every night I read this book.
Do you remember the name of the book?
It was American Indian Basketry. It's got a utilitarian basket on the front. It's red. It's super thin. Yeah. It was written, I'm forgetting the name of the person, but he worked at the Natural History Museum, Rosaire, I think, in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh. And so you did that starting, so you first met Don, you're like 12 or 13.
Yeah, like 12 and a half.
And so you started doing, by 16 you were doing these shows?
So
or even before, you were doing it the whole time?
I was doing shows with Don
really
when I was 13
on.
13 on.
Wow.
And then the first ever antique American Indian art show, the idea that he came up with, which is now the White Hawk Show, I was 16. So I just got my license in December to drive over. And so I drove over from California.
From Santa Barbara.
At that point, we had moved up to Santa Maria, California, which is an hour north of Santa Barbara. Yeah. And, drove over to Santa Fe and spent 2 weeks over here drawing like arrows and, like drawing the sign of how much admission was, because you didn't just make something on a computer then. Right. So it was all hand drawn. So my artistic
And you're now
classes,
in that class, right? At 16, you're in that class, right? And so you already know, right? You already kind of know this is what I'm going to do?
This is what I'm interested in doing. Yeah. But I'm going, how do you do this?
Yeah.
How do you
make a
living? How do you make a living? There's no path for this, right? Like there's no college course for this. Right. There's no set curriculum for it. And even Don, like he worked for McGraw-Hill and worked his way up through business. And then on the weekends he did this, and eventually it became a full-time thing.
Because he loved Indian art as well.
Yes.
And so, but he goes, there's a need here. He saw the need.
Exactly.
And were people doing any kind of shows at that time? Across the country? We think of it now, we have fairs everywhere, but were any art fairs? I guess there must have been antique shows.
There were antique shows, and there were many contemporary American Indian shows that had an element, like I was saying,
Like
of
Swire
historic. Yeah, or more commercial. Like in Los Angeles, the one that I went down, the Great Western Show was there. There was and that was a Great Western Exhibit Center. And then there was a show in Santa Monica at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. So at that point in Los Angeles, there was probably like 4 to 6 shows a year. And that's a lot. And they were fairly well attended. But no one had ever done a show strictly for what we'd call historical material. And at that point, the first show, I think it was pre-1955. And the first couple shows, it was like pre-1950, 1955. And then it was kind of like, we called it an antique American Indian show. And people were kind of saying, well, what determines an antique piece? And so after a couple years, Don and I talked quite a bit about it. And we just determined that show would be pre-World War II. And it really was because a lot of things started to be signed after World War II, and a lot of the Native community that had gone out and fought for the United States came back with different concepts and that. So it seemed like that was really a shift. And even on Navajo textiles, you start seeing a shift from, the dye lots of the brush and earlier textiles to more solid colors.
And the pottery too, even.
Yeah. So there was shifts in the artistic nature of the pieces around World War II. So that really became the cutoff point. So it was pre-World War II show, which was called the Antique Show. And then anything after that was kind of considered part of that contemporary world.
And so what year was that he did his first show? Do you remember what year that?
So that would have been that first show.
And
that would have been right around 78.
So 1978 was the first show.
Yeah, right around that 78, 77, right.
And so you do this, come back and forth every year to Santa Fe.
And I'm going to other shows with him, like as much as I can, taking a couple days off of school.
High school,
exactly. And and at that point in the 70s, there was a big turquoise craze too.
Yeah.
So I would go down to these shows in Los Angeles or other places, buy a bunch of turquoise, come back to my high school, and then bargain with my teachers and say, I'll give you this piece or I'll give you discounts on these pieces if I can have 10 minutes of your class time. So I would take like 10 minutes of class and I would sell stuff to all my classmates.
I see. So you would give them a piece, the teacher gets one free, and then you get to sell it.
Exactly.
And so were you buying and selling besides turquoise at that time? Did you start to go, I can actually maybe make some money if I know what I'm doing?
Exactly. I had started to buy and sell a few things, and my mom would take me around to antique stores, and I would find a few things. Really, when I was probably about 15, that really started. The first piece that I really made money on, I was 13, and I had gone down to one of those shows, so about a year after I had first met everybody. And I was spending the whole weekend at this show. And Grace and George Marsick were in from Chicago, and they stayed at Don's place as well. And they were going out to the Rose Bowl swap meet. And I said, do you mind if I go with you to the Rose Bowl swap meet? And they were like, no problem. So we got to the Rose Bowl swap meet, and they said, well, we're really looking for the same thing. So we're going to go this way.
And you're 13.
Yeah, and you should go this way.
You little boy go there.
Yeah, exactly.
And
that's kind of what it
LA.
was, because they said, well, this direction's where the antiques are, and we're going to go that direction, but you should go this way so that we're kind of separate, because otherwise
We're competing.
So I walked around the outside where mainly it's just all new stuff.
Right.
And there was this one guy that worked in the movie industry, and he had 3 Navajo textiles. And one of them, I thought, was a transitional piece, and it had Spider Woman crosses on it. And I was like, oh, this piece looks great, but I don't really know. Like, I've read
You're
some
13.
books, and I've folded a lot of rugs by then, not a lot, but it started to fold a lot of rugs. And so I was like, this feels like it's transitional. And I said, how much do you want for it? And he was like, 120. And at that day I had $110 with me, once again, from babysitting, cutting grass, all that stuff. And I go, well, I need to give some for gas money to George and Grace, and I need to buy lunch and da-da-da-da. So I have maybe about $100 that I can spend on this piece. So and I kind of seen that dealer interaction, and from my first one that you can negotiate sometimes. Right. Some people will, some people won't. So I was like, okay, so I offered him $100, took out $100 bill and said, $100. Yeah. And he was like, okay, I'll take it. And I was like, yes, all right. So I got this piece, put it over my shoulder, continued to walk around the Rose Bowl swap meet, got back around to where all the antiques are. And George and Grace and this guy that was a collector and dealer, were walking up towards me, and they're like, their eyes got really big, and they're like, where did you find that, Kim? And I was like, oh, over where you sent me, over on this other side. And they're like, well, in the antique section, no one found any American Indian art today. Right. So like, this is it. And so the guy that was with him, he looks at the piece and he goes, that's a pretty nice piece. And I said, yeah, I think it's a transitional blanket. And he goes, yeah, it is. I was like, oh, good, And he goes, do you want to sell it? And inside I'm going like, well, I don't know. Like, yes, no, I want to be I want to try to start earning money doing this. But yet on the other hand, I have that collector side of me, like, no, like I really, like, it's my first blanket I've ever bought, like, and so I thought for a second and went through that scenario in my mind, and I said, and I go, yeah, no, I want to sell it. How much will you give me for it? And he goes, no, that's not how it works. He goes, you need to come up with a price for it.
To a 13-year-old.
Yeah. And I'm going like, okay, I spent $100 on it, but I've seen a few of these at the, in Don's booth and other people at the shows that I've been going to. And they usually sell them for around $500, $600, $700, something like that. And I go, but he's a dealer, so he's got to make something. This is all running through my mind. Like just my mind's going crazy right now. And so I look at him and I go, $450. And he goes, oh, that seems fair. Pulls out the money, pays me off. I pass out.
You must have just thought you died and gone to heaven.
Exactly. It was
And you also thought you could do that every time.
I was hoping, but soon learned that that's not quite how the business works.
And so were you hooked at that moment when you sold that, do you think?
I was hooked at that moment, but still, even at that time, I really didn't think I could make a living just doing this. And so it really took several more years for me really to get to the place that I was like, okay, I'm really going to do this. So I finished up high school, continuing to do this, coming over, doing the Santa Fe shows, doing the other shows, finding as much stuff as I could. I was also dealing, and I was importing some stuff from the Philippines and different places and selling stuff. And I was looking at it, but I was really going, okay, I need to go into international marketing is what I'll do. And I'll make a living and work for a company for several years. And then I'll gradually go into it, because that's all the models I had ever seen, was that's kind of how they did it. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it. And so I graduated high school, and I was going off to Iowa to this school, college, my first year of university. And I had some trying things in my family life, like my brother passed away, which was my hero.
Oh my gosh, how old was he?
He was 25, so 8 years older than I was. I was 17. My parents got a divorce. My great aunt that I really cherished, who was a great artist, was strangled to death by her son. So it was just like and I was going off to college from California to Iowa. So I was really like, okay, what's life really about, at this
really
point?
Hard.
And so I was really questioning those things and going like, what do I really want? Like life is precious. Like you just don't know how much time one has. And it's, unfortunately, it's proven over and over again as people that we love pass on. And so that's kind of set a tone. So I went off to college my freshman year, did marketing. That was my emphasis.
And did your brother die when you were at Iowa, or before?
No, before. All that summer, all within a month period of time.
Right before you were going to go to
just before
college,
I was leaving California.
A divorce, aunt,
my brother, my brother, and then drove a car off from Santa Maria at the time to Iowa.
That's very heavy.
Yeah, and so went in and did my year of marketing at this liberal arts school in Iowa, and then towards the end of that first year, I was like, okay, it was a small school. It was smaller than my high school. It was 1,800 students. And I wanted to run for class president. And so, but then the higher ups at the university said, no, you can't run for class president. You're only going to be a sophomore. You have to be a junior or senior. And I was like, that shouldn't have anything to do with it. So I got this petition together. I got like 800 students to sign it so that I could be class president. And the school still said, no, you just can't do it until you're a junior. And I was like, well, then I'm not coming back to this school.
Yeah.
So they had an exchange program with Japan. So I said, I'm going to Japan because I hear that, Japan at that point was really important in international business and marketing. And I was like, if I'm going to go into marketing, I better learn Japanese, learn the culture.
Right.
And that's where I'm going. And then I went off to Japan. And Japan, at that point, everything was like the opposite of what I had thought before. Like, not everything, but many things. And so once again, push the boundaries of like, what path do you want to take and how do you take a path?
And what were those things specifically that really were so different?
So it was just like from food to language to how people interacted to, and then I saw foreigners there that, were doing, had just come to Japan and started living here and continue to live there, or they decided that they loved art and they were going to just like study Japanese swords or something like that. And I was like, you can do that?
You got money.
But every detail of how people interact is different.
Yeah.
And so it really challenged the cultural norms of are you aggressive? Are you passive? Are you loud? Are you soft to make a statement? Where does your power come from? Just every aspect of that. Japan's culture is obviously a very, it's a culture that has a lot of people living in a very small area. So people really have to be considerate of each other. And so just the politeness levels, just so many different things that challenged all of the preconceived concepts, kind of from religion to everything. My dad was a minister, right?
Yeah, that had to be a big thing. Right.
So, most people there were, they all have kind of multiple beliefs, from Shinto, which is a traditional Japanese belief, to Buddhism. And so it was just everything. And these people were so incredibly nice. Like
Plus you stood out because you're like 6'3", right? Or so?
There were, a little over 6'4", blue hair. Blue eyes, and at that point I actually had blonde hair, and and would go at Christmas time, went on this trip around down to Okinawa, hooked up with a group of actors from Tokyo, went to all these little schools in the middle of nowhere in Okinawa for about a week with them, and the entire school at the end of the performance, I'm just there like just watching and helping set up the stage. But it was really a taste of stardom, I guess, because the entire school, they could care less about these actors. I felt so bad. But I'm a little over 6'4", blonde hair, blue eyes, as I said. The entire school would line up for my autograph.
Oh, that's so funny.
And like these little girls would bring their most prized purse and just say, would you please just sign this for me? So it was quite an experience.
And you enjoyed that?
I did enjoy that whole.
Do you think that helped you as far as being a show promoter? Because you have to do a lot of that, really.
It does.
I think
it
so.
did. And I think that it really opened my eyes to say there's many ways that one can do something. Mm-hmm. There's not just one correct way. There's multiple ways. And the more you can really get other people's information and knowledge can really help in making a final decision and really opening it up, my eyes to like, here's a whole nother world of art. And, American Indian art is an art form that I'll always love. But, Japanese ink painting, Japanese lacquer are things that I collect a little of and really enjoy. And it just opened my horizons to say, wow, there is a whole world out there beyond what I had ever been exposed to.
And you stayed there for a year?
Yes, a year. And then over the course of the next 5 years, I spent about 2.5 years in Japan. And I would come back every summer and spend a month here and make sure that I basically ran the shows for Don. Mm-hmm. And then within 4 years, it was 5 years after the first show, that started the Marin Show. The very first show was in San Francisco.
You started that.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're 21.
Yep,
At that
21.
point. So did you go to another college besides Iowa and Japan?
Yeah. So then when I came back from Japan, I went to UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara, and then I got a full-time position at Sotheby's for a year and a half.
And that was in New York?
In Los Angeles.
That was in LA.
So I went
and what
to,
did that do for you, do you think?
That just once again expanded those horizons and said, I met a lot of people that dealt in a lot of different types of art forms. The quote unquote experts that worked at Sotheby's, and I would fly myself to Hong Kong and work on those sales. So I met all the experts in the Chinese, Japanese departments in London would come to those sales, and New York. So I got to know those people. And so it just opened the horizons. Like my position at Sotheby's was I was just in the warehouse, but it was the best possible place to be because every piece that came in, you got to handle it. And you had the quote unquote experts come into the back and talk to you about pieces. And if you showed interest, they're glad to tell you about these pieces.
And you were kind of focused on Asian art with Sotheby's?
Correct.
Yeah.
Asian. And then they had just started in Los Angeles with Russell Clore. Yeah. And that's how I actually got the job at Sotheby's, was I met Russell at one of these shows.
Yes.
And I said, I'm back from Japan. Is there any openings or anything? And he was in charge of the warehouse. And he said, well, let me talk to Marvin Newman, the guy that ran it. And he said, yeah, I know, Kim, with your interests and your background, we definitely have a position. We'll make a position for you. Wow. And I had worked in Sears in Santa Maria. And I played soccer with the guy the general manager of Sears in Santa Maria, his kids. And so I went back and I had started to work at Sears just to make some money. Mm-hmm. And I went in and I told the assistant manager that was in charge of the department I was working in that I was going to leave and I was going to go work at Sotheby's full time. And his reaction was so strong because they were planning on me becoming a manager at Sears and becoming a Searsman. Like I was going to do international marketing, and they were sure that I would end up at Sears. He actually slapped me across the face because he just couldn't control it. He goes, like, you're just wasting your life. Like, what are you doing going to Sotheby's and the art world? Like, that's just insane.
What did you do when he did that?
So I was just in shock, and I was like, no, but this is what I love. You don't understand.
Did he apologize or anything? Or
no, I think he was kind of just like in shock too. And what could you really say back to him in some ways? Because he had no interest in art. Yeah. He had no understanding of it. He was a Sears man. He had dedicated his life to Sears.
He saw the potential in you.
So yeah. So how could you really say like, oh, Sears, I have no interest in this. This is what he had dedicated his life to. So it really just showed how much he cared about me, and that from his vantage point, that he needed to put that out there. Yeah. So I went off. I said, thank you, for
Thanks
all
for the
of
slap.
that. Yeah. And I said, I'm off to the art world.
Did you shop at Sears after that?
Not there. I was too scared. No. So I went down to LA and basically just slept in my car for the first 3 weeks and got settled into Los Angeles. I didn't have a place to live in LA and trying to figure out. I had no money really at all for LA prices and live on my own and da-da-da-da. So
you were homeless.
Yeah, exactly. And so finally one of the experts, Philip Jelly, who now works in New York still with Sotheby's, he said, Kim, where are you staying? And I said, I drive up to this campground like an hour and a half out of LA, and I stay up there in my car and take a shower and come in early in the morning. And he goes, I've got an apartment just a couple miles from here. And he goes, I could use some extra cash. So if you want to sleep on the couch, I got a pull-out couch. We're good to go. Right. And I said, done. Heck yeah.
And you're 20 at that time?
I'm 19 at that time.
Yeah. And so you do that for a year?
I do that for a year, and they close.
And you're working full time at that
full time.
Yeah.
And going to UCLA night school.
Got it.
Because I wanted to continue, because at that point I'm edging more and more. And really Japan had really kind of set in my mind, maybe I can just do this for a livelihood. And, the show that Don had started had done better and better. And I had always come back and worked on those shows. And, so I was like, okay, there's that side of it that I can work on the show. I'm learning more and more about different things that maybe I could find and sell. And so I'm kind of starting to think I don't need to work for a big company in international marketing. There's other pathways. And then Sotheby's closed down their LA office because they had overextended themselves in their big building in New York City. And so they wanted to sell off their property that they owned in Los Angeles. And so
what was that like when they said, sorry, you're gone?
So it was kind of like, okay, well, what should I do? And I had made enough friends and acquaintances that they said, if you want, Kim, we'll hire you in New York. So you can go to New York and work for Sotheby's full time. And I was like, but, then I can't really do these shows in the summertime. So that was also a turning point to kind of say, what is the path forward? And I had more interest in Asian art. So I decided, okay, I'm just going to continue. I'm going to make my own path. And that, I guess that really was, I never really thought of that moment with Sotheby's was really kind of the turning point for me just to say, I'm going to make my own path. I'm not going to work for a big company, because if I really had wanted to do that, Sotheby's would have been the perfect opportunity to go to New York, work there. And at that point, I knew enough people that I would have gone into the Oriental art department. And I'm sure Ellen Nampura had started the Indian, and it was growing and building. Right. And I'm sure I could have worked with her. So there could have been a path through Sotheby's for sure. But at that point, I just kind of said, no, I'm gonna make my own path here and see where it goes.
And you're 20, right?
Yeah.
And you're still doing the school.
Yeah.
So what do you do now?
So then I go, okay. So I'm continuing to do the show over here in Santa Fe every summer. And then I decide, I still want to get some education, but I want to broaden out that education. And I'm really interested in Chinese material as well. So I went and lived in Taiwan for 6 months and studied Chinese language because I saw big opportunities potentially in China. And so I studied Chinese language. So I had a little Japanese language, a little Chinese language, a little understanding of both art forms. And then came back and continued to do some schooling here in the U.S. And I went to UC Berkeley then for a year. The number one painting person in Chinese painting, James Cahill, taught there. And so even though I was still an undergrad, I talked to him about my experience and all that. And he said, yeah, no, you can sit in on our graduate classes on Chinese painting. So that was great. And so so I continued with school for 6 years. Off and on, different night programs, day programs, So I got 6 years of education, but I never got a degree.
Yeah.
Did you ever think courses.
Did you ever really want to? I mean, or were you just going, this is going to help me in whatever I'm going to do?
That's what I decided at that point. Yeah. Kind of is, I'm going to take classes that really, like from philosophy to marketing to accounting to art history, this wide range of classes that I was interested in that I thought could help me do what it seems like I want to do. Yeah. And my feeling at that point was, if this path ever doesn't work, then I'll go back to school.
Right, finish up.
And I'll get a degree and then go a more standard. Yeah, exactly. You got it. So that was kind of the thought. And knock on wood, so far, I've not had to go back to school.
But during this, and you're doing all these trips, you start the Marin Show.
Correct.
And when you're 21 years old. Now, so the Marin Show, for people who might not know, is a great show. I did it a lot of times, many, many times. In fact, my first show was there, and we might talk about that. But it's an amazing show, right? And how did you go? Oh, San Francisco, or Marin is the place. And
so it wasn't really myself or Don that decided Marin should be the next place for a show. It was actually a guy named Gene Balaam that was the director of the California Academy of Sciences, which is a really important institution. It's kind of changed its thrust and focus at this point. They've redone it. But in those days, it had a lot of dioramas and was very much involved with ethnographic material. and they were getting a really important collection of American Indian material called the Elkus Collection.
Yeah, I know.
And they wanted to...
There's a connection to Dixon on that. Did you know
Oh,
that?
no, I didn't.
Yeah, Elkus collected Maynard Dixon. He knew
Oh,
Dixon.
wow.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
They probably got some of that as well.
Kind of that small world of,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
of art and collectors.
So they were getting the Elkus collection.
So they were getting the Elkus Collection, and he was like, you know, what I see happening here in Santa Fe should happen in San Francisco. You know, San Francisco has a lot of collectors of ethnographic material. You know, my museum's really behind this. We're getting this Elkus collection. We want to promote that. So I went to Don and I said, you know, Gene wants to do this show up in San Francisco. Do you have interest? And Don goes, no, I don't have any interest. Like, you know, you basically run this show. That's all. That's plenty for me.
Yeah.
And we had grown the show then to 2 shows. And shortly after that, we grew it to 3 shows. So it was the American Indian, Antique American Indian, an ethnographic show, and an Old West show.
Right. I remember
And
them all.
so that was lots, you know. And for me though, it wasn't lots. Like I wanted to conquer the world, right?
Yeah, you're 21.
Yeah. And so Gene said, you know, I really wanted to work with you. And I said, well, what can you do? And he said, well, we have a mailing list that's 300,000 people, and we'll put you in a brochure about, I think it was called Circle of the World or something like that, the Elkus collection. And it was a special brochure, and we'll do a whole panel about the show if you do a show up here. You know, we'll put it on our invites in other ways. Like they didn't have email blasts and that, but they would promote it for us and put, you know, signage up at the museum. And I was like, well, this is an amazing opportunity to work that close to a museum.
Yeah.
And they would bring part of the Elkus collection to the show and exhibit it. And so it was like a preview of the Elkus collection at this first show. So it was like everything combined was just like, you couldn't have asked for better marketing than this. So that's how the show,
And where did that open? Where was it?
It was at the Concourse, 9th and Brannan, downtown San Francisco.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so the first year it was there, and then
And how did it do?
It did well. Yeah.
And how did you get dealers, more importantly? Because you're an unknown 21-year-old kid.
No, because I'd been
'Cause you
producing the
got-
show in
that's right,
Santa
got
Fe
it.
since I was 16.
So you snagged all those
So
deals. Got
all
it.
those dealers that I'd been working with, and
Right.
I managed that show basically from 19 on. Like 3 years after that show
Don's like,
started,
"Go
I
running it."
started
Yeah.
to manage
No, you
the
did. I
Santa Fe
remember.
shows. So I knew all the dealers and all of that. So at that point, I just said, hey to everybody, here's what's happening in San Francisco. And everyone was like, yeah, like count me, I'm on board. So we went up and did it in San Francisco, and you know, the hall that we used, they wanted a huge increase the next year. And it was just like, you know, the material just didn't command that kind of price for a booth. You know, you
not at that
had to
time.
keep your booth at a certain price structure or it just didn't make sense.
And what year was this?
So this was
Your first one was what
so
year?
like probably like around 82.
That was when the
something
first
like that.
Moran Show was? Or
Yeah,
not Moran,
something
but
like
San
that.
Fran. So you had to move it out of San Francisco?
So yeah, so then I looked all around that area and found a place in the Marin Center, which was the last publicly commissioned place of Frank Lloyd Wright.
Right.
And so I thought, with this pond and everything, this is the perfect venue. And this year we're actually moving it back into San Francisco.
Oh, that's hilarious. I didn't know that.
So and
Probably a
putting
good move,
and
actually.
putting it in the same hall as the tribal show. So it'll be 2 shows, same hall though, but we're keeping the shows separate. So the full circle there, and so the show did well. The second year it did even better up in Marin because, you know, it was actually a much more conducive space to what people were used to at that point. And at that point, you know, booth shows really didn't exist. Like at that point, we're just starting to have like a pipe and drape kind of booth. Like there's no such thing as a hard wall booth. It's really, you know, even antique shows were really tabletop shows. So it's really this transition of going to a new location, really pipe and drape, tabletops. And it's not for about 10 more years that really a hard wall show comes into play.
Somewhere around 92.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did your show, I think it was 89, I think was the first time I did it when I was still a doctor.
Yeah.
And I have to tell the story of Kim Martindale on my first show. So I'm a doctor working in L.A. I was at Tustin, I think, at that point. And let's see. Actually, I think it was at El Dorado. Anyway, I was with the Marines. And I had to do the ER. But I wanted to do this show. I was really into it. I said, you let me in, and I did the show. It was great.
Yeah.
I did great. Though, of course, I had material, and all the dealers were like, oh, yeah, this is fresh material. And I didn't know you had to go and try to find other material. But I sold really well. It was a fantastic show. And then I'm like, I got to make my flight.
Yeah.
And I got to get back because I've got to be on duty. And it was like, so I'm loading up everything at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm like, I got a 6 o'clock flight. I can make it, no problem.
Right.
And you're like, you come over and say, you can't do that. And I'm like, what do you mean? I got to go. You go, no. You go, no.
This is against the rules.
Yeah, people pay good money for this. You got to stay till 5. You can't load out till 5. You know, it's not my thing. And I go, but I got to do it. And you go, okay, listen, you're a newbie. I'll let you do it this time, but never again. I was like, wow, I almost got kicked out of my first show. And I thought.
And that's how we really met.
Yeah. Me getting in trouble.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I've done a zillion shows with you since, and I guarantee you, I've never put anything up before 5 o'clock or 6, whatever the show is. I always remembered that from now on. It's like, nope, I got to wait.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, but it sticks in my mind. And I laugh every time.
Exactly.
That was many years ago.
Indeed.
So you do the Marin Show. Enough of me. That was a really fun thing for me in my mind. And you're still young. You're 21.
Yeah.
And so at some point you must say, okay, I'm going to start being a dealer and buying and selling as well to survive. Because the shows aren't going to pay that much, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, I had continued after that blanket at 13. I had continued. My parents would drive me around and go to antique stores and find things, and then at the shows, I'd look for things. And so I had started to buy and sell. And at that point, I would say probably 60-70% of my income was buying and selling, and 30% was show side of things. And so no, it was really kind of, and I had bought and sold some Asian material as well. So some Japanese things, some Chinese material, because it's a world that, many people really don't know and still don't really know that well. And certainly in China, Chinese art's taken off, like some of those early paintings that I saw. And I went to like this symposium in Hong Kong when I'm like 19. And, there's a talk on what is a Chinese painting and da-da-da-da. And, they're talking about this artist, Qi Bai Shi, that's, does these horses and flowers, and he's famous for his horses. And they're selling for like $2,000 or whatever. And people are going like, in the Western world, like who'd ever want it?
Right.
Qi Bai Shi horse,
And now what is it worth?
Now they're approaching $1 million,
It's part of you wish you had stayed on that track of the Asian art, Chinese and things?
No, I mean, yeah, there's definitely a part that sometimes I think about that. And
you would
I
have
think
been a leader for sure in that field.
Yeah, completely. And so I think about that often, but I really made a conscious decision because I really had to at some point make that decision, because I was moving forward with the show with Don, the Moran Show, and I was buying and selling American Indian. And I was really kind of like, if I want to do Chinese, I really need to move back to China or Japan and really live in Asia for longer, or go back even to Sotheby's. I still had friends at Sotheby's and learn more there, but really get into that world. And the person that was, handling the Sotheby's Chinese painting department, Arnold Chang, got to know him, and he's an artist himself, and so it was really, I had to make a decision of which path I wanted to go on. And I really thought back that really American Indian is my first love. And so I decided that I wanted to go into that world and more in depth than that. It doesn't mean that I still don't love Asian art, and maybe at some point, who knows, maybe I'll do an American Indian gallery in China or something.
Well, and you're working with and we'll get to that point. But you're working with a lot of the Asian
A lot
galleries
of Asian
now
galleries.
for the art show that you
Yeah,
do in LA,
yeah.
which we'll get to. But I want to just kind of fill in the back. So you still do these shows. You're running it. You're running the Marin. You're
Yeah.
helping Don Bennett run the
Basically
White
run
House.
those, and he's supervising, and obviously he's making phone calls and getting dealers on board and
Right.
all of that. So it's, so
And
yeah.
so how long did you do that before there was kind of a change? Because at some point you quit working with
when
Don.
I was 32 was the last that I worked with Don on those shows, and that was a very difficult moment in my life.
Yeah.
And I
was-
think, to be fair to his memory and to other people that were around at that point, let's just say that we went different ways.
Right.
I thought I would continue on in doing those shows, but that's not what transpired. But I have to thank him for giving me a lot of insights into the business and pulling me to the other side of the table when I was 12 years old.
Right.
In that. But that was probably one of the most difficult, except for losing my brother or my mom. That was probably one of the most difficult moments in my life.
Yeah, because you were expecting to kind of go down the road of the White Hawk. And,
Completely.
And that didn't happen, and it kind of got
Correct.
sold and went in a different direction without you.
Yes.
Yeah. And I can get it. I can see how that would be just like a knife in your
Yeah.
heart.
Because, he was another father to me.
Yeah, right.
He had a daughter, Brooke, who's still around, and I helped raise her. So there was many, from business to personal
Right,
to
right.
every aspect.
Right. Yeah. And it's clear, though, you still have a great place for him in your heart.
Oh,
Yeah,
indeed.
things happen. It's
Yeah.
easier as you get older, too, that you can
Yeah.
see how things go, because now you've had so many more shows.
Yeah.
And so let's just talk about a little bit about the Santa Fe show that, you developed your own Santa Fe show here. And when did those start?
So actually, right after kind of that ending of my involvement with what was now called the White Hawk Show,
Yeah.
because of where Don's home was in California, was the White Hawk Survey. That's where the name came from. And so when I moved out of those shows, I was pretty this was, like we just said, it was tough.
Right.
And actually, John Morris came by my gallery. I had a gallery at that point in Ventura,
Yes.
California.
And he was in Malibu or something?
And he was in Malibu, and he came by the gallery and, and said, "Kim, what's up?" And I was like, "Oh, explain this, da-da-da."
Right.
And he goes, "Well, I've done lots of things in Santa Fe." He goes, "Let's do a show in Santa Fe together."
For those who don't know who John Morris is, he also did a little show called Woodstock, which is coming up. In fact, we'll have this podcast. We did a podcast with John, and he was the booker for all those acts, which is a fantastic podcast to listen to. So he says, "Yeah, I know a little bit about shows," which he did.
And promotion, and he was that was his position at Woodstock, was
promotion.
Yeah,
And
and putting on the show. He
Yeah.
was in charge of and putting together the behind the scenes of Woodstock and the announcer there. And it's 50th anniversary, so he's been back in New York giving all kinds of interviews and that about Woodstock. So an exciting moment for Woodstock's history. So, and I didn't know a lot about John at that point,
Right.
but we talked about it, and he kind of told me some of these stories
Right.
about, this is my background, because I had known him from doing the Washington, D.C. show that I did. And
I did that show.
Yeah, you definitely did that show for a couple of years. And
I still remember that show because I found a great pair of Navajo dress halves that were
Oh, wow.
right there.
Perfect. Yeah. So I did that show for a couple of years, and he came and did it, and did a show in White Plains, New York for a couple of years, one in the basement and one on the main floor. And he was at one of those shows. And so I knew him as a dealer, but I didn't really know the background. So when he said, I've been thinking about doing shows in Santa Fe, I said, "Well, what's your production background?" And he started going, "Well, I was a production manager at Woodstock and da-da-da-da-da."
Yeah.
I was like, "Okay, that's a good background."
And you're 32 or so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he goes, and I said, "I don't want to compete. I've given everything to those shows. I've spent hours and hours building those shows. I've had friends call and say, 'Do you want to go do this?' And I said, 'No, I'm working on this project.' And I said, 'I don't want to do anything that would impact those shows in a negative way.' And he said, 'Well, we don't need to do it in the summertime. Let's do it over Christmas. He goes, Christmas is a huge time in New Mexico. And I said, that sounds like a good idea. Then it's really not competing with those shows. It maybe is just helping a market grow more. And that's always kind of been, I hope that is how people have always seen the projects that I take on, that I'm really trying to build a marketplace for a material that I love. And so I said, yeah, so let's form a partnership, and we're going to call these shows the Antiquity Shows. And it was the Winter Antiquity Show. And it was the 27th through the 29th every year for like 5-6 years.
I think I did that show.
Yeah, probably
Yeah,
you did those shows. Yeah. And those shows were pretty exciting, fun shows. You know, it wasn't the best for the holidays, for family and that kind of thing.
That's why I remember I did do those shows.
Exactly.
I do remember those, actually, as a matter of fact.
But they were fun shows,
they were good
and
shows.
It's an amazing time to be in Santa Fe is around that time.
And so when did you say, okay, now we're going to go and do the summer shows? Because you've done it for quite a while.
Yeah. So the Objects of Art show was really kind of came in because it was time for a new concept in shows, I felt. And, you know, antique shows are really dying all over the country. I mean, there's still some semi-strong antique shows in the East Coast where antiques are still a little bit more embraced, but even there, they're having troubles. And in art shows have really taken over the place. Like almost every city that used to have an antique show now has some kind of art show.
Right.
And I just saw that this change was happening. And I thought, you know, it's really time for a new brand of shows. And so I came up with the term Objects of Art Show. And because to me, really these items or objects, whether it be American Indian, Japanese, Chinese, folk art, whatever.
Paintings too.
You know,
Sculpture,
paintings, everything should all be part of this, what people think of as art. And some are objects, some are flat, you know, as in paintings and that, and quote unquote fine art with the paintings and sculpture. But all these other things hold their own in them. And I felt like there should be a show that puts all of this together, whether it's new or old, makes no difference. But it has to be original to its intent.
Yeah.
And that you can put something, you can take a Kachina and you can put that next to, you know,
Picasso.
Yeah, or Giacometti bronze or whatever. And they hold up against each other as long as the Kachina is a great Kachina because Giacometti is a great artist or Picasso is a great artist. If you take a crappy sculptor, then you can take a crappy Kachina and it will hold up. But if you're taking the best, you want the best of those worlds to compare. And I think those things hold up against each other. And, you know, and Tony Berlant's famous saying that, you know, that really a Navajo textile is just a painting done with wool. And I agree with that sentiment completely. You put it up on the wall and it's a painting, you know? And so this new concept of a show, Objects of Art, because John and I had separated for a while. He had continued to do the antiquity shows, then he stopped doing those. And I had got really busy with some other projects I had. And then it was like time to bring something back to Santa Fe. And I thought Santa Fe is really the perfect place for an Objects of Art show because many people in their homes in Santa Fe, they mix historic and contemporary material. And at that point, 10 years ago, other designers were doing it, but not as much as they do now, mixing historic and contemporary material.
This is our 10th year here?
Yeah. 10th year for the Objects of Art show. And so that was something that was exciting to bring back to Santa Fe. And White Hawk at that point had tried an antique show and it didn't work. So I felt like, you know, it's really not competing. It's doing something different. And then White Hawk Show really changed their format to not have an exclusive antique American Indian show.
Right.
And I feel strongly that is how White Hawk even started, because I was there, that it was about antique American Indian material in juxtaposition with Indian market swaya, contemporary Indian material, and really making this one moment in time the most important moment for American Indian art. And I think every business, arena, whatever collector fields, whatever hobby, everything needs a moment. whether it's a Super Bowl or, NBA finals or, you name
Or
it.
Indian market.
Yeah.
Which is kind of where it comes the week before Indian market.
You have to have a moment that's the moment for this type of thing. And Indian market is a great moment for the best of contemporary.
That's right.
But it didn't have historic, right? And I felt like it's crucial to have an antique American Indian show and SWAIA working hand in hand. And I've always wanted this concept that started last year called Native Art Week, where all of these groups get together, all the galleries do their shows, the museums do shows, and we call it Native Art Week, and we honor the historical material, we honor the contemporary material, and anybody in the world that wants to know about American Indian art,
Right.
if there's one place you have to go to and be, it's in Santa Fe at this time of year, and it is the nexus and the most important moment for American Indian art in any place, any other time. There's other important moments, but
Right.
this is the
Right.
moment.
Yeah.
And so, if you want to learn about American Indian art, if Good Morning America wants to do a spot on American Indian art,
that's right.
this is the moment
Right.
to do it.
And you also have the top Native American dealers and artists. Everyone shows up at the same time.
Everybody is here.
Yeah.
So if you're part of the Native American world, contemporary, historic, something in between, you're here
Right.
in Santa Fe at this moment. So there is not a more important moment. So I felt like as soon as White Hawk combined their ethnographic and American Indian into one show,
Right. And
then
the
it was
cowboy
like,
thing, too.
then it's like, yeah, and it's like, great, that's a fine show, but it's not just about American Indian.
Right. Right.
And so I felt it was vital. So 5 years ago, once they did that there is a standalone show that is just antique American Indian art
Right.
in Santa Fe at this moment.
Yeah, and that's basically Indian Market's third week in August, and this is about 4 days, runs about 4 days right up to that Friday every year. So
Yeah.
just in case for next year, if you're listening to this, that's when it's going to be.
Yeah. So you can come for a
Yeah.
week and see the best of the old, the
Yeah.
best of the new.
And the best dealers. People like myself show up. I don't know if I'm the best, but I'm definitely...
You're one of the top.
I'm one of the top 100.
No, way
That's
higher
fine.
than that.
That's fair. Okay, 98. But anyway, but people like myself who might not normally do these shows, because we have galleries
Right.
and all this stuff, we feel it's important enough to go, okay, we're going to fly out staff, we're going to show up to the show, and we want to meet the people that are here that are coming to this thing. So
Right.
it is an opportunity for sure.
And I think those 100,000, or they say up to 150,000 people that come in, they're saying, or I believe they're saying, I have some interest in this cultural material.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that contemporary material is fantastic. And if that's what you respond to, then that's what you should purchase. I think more and more, people are forming collections of contemporary and historic
Yeah, that's what we
material
do.
and intermixing those things. And I think even to really even understand a lot of the contemporary material that's being produced by Native Americans, you need to understand the historical material.
That's right. And they're looking at it too, because they take ideas from that as well. We have Native artists that come through and they get ideas, and I think it's a beautiful blend that goes on. But before we completely close this out, because I don't want to do it, there's another component of you which is really interesting, which I've done, which is the LA Art Show, and that's a major show. I mean, that's a force. That's a tour de force.
Yeah.
And so that thing's 25 years.
This is our 25th anniversary
Yeah.
coming up
Yeah.
in 2020. So I've been doing it now for 25 years, really the concept for 27 years.
Wow.
And so that's a show that I always used to say it had 14 dealers and 250 people. And because it's the 25th anniversary, going back through historical material, and I found the original poster in the original catalog, and there was actually 16 galleries. So I stand corrected on this podcast. For all those other statements I've made, it's not 14, it's 16 galleries. We're at that first show in Pasadena.
Yeah.
And it was put on by FADA, Fine Art Dealers Association, and they interviewed several different producers, and a guy named Jimmy Vitanza, who used to deal in paintings and American Indian
I know
stuff,
Jimmy.
said, this guy named Kim, he's young, energetic. You should talk to him about
Right.
it. So I went to this meeting with George Stern, David Starry Sheets, and talked to them and Jimmy Vitanza and said, and they said, are you interested in producing this show? And I said, yeah, I'm interested in producing shows. But I said, I'm only interested if you guys don't want it to be a regional show. If you're willing to stick at it and grow it to the point that it's an international show, then I'm on board. And they said, well, that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can do.
Right.
So started with 16 dealers, and it was all FADA members at that point in Pasadena. We weren't even in an exhibit hall at Pasadena Center. We were in the hallway in front of the exhibit halls because it's just
funny.
16 dealers. And my friends were pouring wine the first night, for the
Oh my
opening
God.
night, which was a Friday night opening, a Saturday, Sunday show. And so it was humble beginnings. And as I said, the 250 people was a real number. And that's how many people attended that Friday night and Saturday and Sunday, the entire show. And then we moved from there to UCLA, to John Wooden Center.
Yep.
And then you were involved in some of those. And then to Barker Hangar, which you were involved
Yeah,
in.
I did that too.
And then after Barker Hangar, I saw that downtown LA was really developing.
Yeah.
And it had been developing for many years, but it seemed like there had been a few things that really were making downtown the place. It hadn't been there yet. And I really made a decision. I said, I really felt it was time to go down to the convention center, get the city involved, rather than waiting for downtown to explode and then trying to get a date down there. And we were building tents onto the Barker Hangar where it was in Santa Monica. And our tents were 100,000 square feet. And it was just like, there's so many things that make sense. Yeah, no, it had its charm.
Yeah.
And it was the West Side too. And that's meant a lot for many years. And so finally it was like, okay, let's, do what the big shows do, they're in major facilities, or Freeze has a huge tent, but that's
been
like
to it.
250, 300,000 square feet.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And so we moved it downtown, and the last years at Barker Hangar, we were getting 10,000, if we were lucky, really 6,000 to 10,000 people over the course of the event. And the last 3 years downtown LA, we've broken 60 to 70,000 people every year. Have galleries now from 18 different countries.
Wow. How many galleries are there? Actually?
So about 120 galleries. Wow. And we have a thing called Diverse Art LA, which brings in museums from Los Angeles, like Los Angeles County Museum of Art is part of it. The Autry some years participates, Museum of Latin American Art. The National Museum of Latin Art is coming out. Last year we had the #1 artist from Argentina, Marta Minahin, came up and did a video presentation. The government of Argentina came up, the National Museum came up and presented that. So there was just a lot of things that every year that it grows more and more. And
so FADA, they ultimately sold the show and
they
you took it
sold
over.
the show 7 years ago. And I bought into it with some partners that produce other shows on the East Coast that are more historic oriented shows.
Right. And now this is really more a contemporary art show.
It's definitely a contemporary art show. It has a section in it called Roots, which harkens back to the beginning of the show, the first shows, and the beginning of painting. And there's dealers in there that either deal in historical work or work that is done by contemporary artists that have chosen to paint in those styles.
Yeah. So, but pretty much almost 98% of the show is now very contemporary.
Yes.
Yeah, I've gone out to it just because it's a blast just to go. And
It's a fun night.
it's
I mean,
a super fun place to go. I mean,
like
there's
the
some
opening night-
amazing art there. And it must do well enough for the galleries, sell well enough for them to continue to do this, right?
Yeah. And, like last year we had 9 galleries from Korea, 8 galleries from Japan. One of the #1 galleries from Japan that does Hong Kong Basel came and did it last year. He did really well. He's coming back. He signed a 2-year contract to come back.
I highly encourage people to go to this show. It's in January.
Yeah.
When
Well,
is it?
actually, this year we've moved it to February 5th to the 8th.
Oh, okay, there you go.
And it's in a back-to-back with Freeze time period. It's
very
just
good.
started last year in Los Angeles.
So, and that's going to be the normal time from now on, you think?
Yes.
The first
First
week in
weekend of
February.
February.
That's a better time, actually, for me.
Yeah.
One last thing I just want to talk about, because as we talk about this art show in LA that started, with Western art basically,
Yeah.
and California art and that
California
kind of stuff.
plein air.
Yeah, and now it's completely changed to contemporary. So we see a major change. How do you see our world of Indian, Native American, antique things like that going? Because things are changing. I mean, it's going to affect you too, because dealers are getting older.
Yeah, and it affects me. I mean, that's what I form my collection with. That's my retirement plan,
Yeah,
really, are
right.
things that I love. And I have a majority of my collection is American Indian material. Certainly have other things as well. But so I see that right now that the world really is looking towards contemporary art. And I even see some of the big name contemporary artists from 10, 15 years ago that are now in their 50s or something like that those artists are hardly even collected, that people are really looking to young artists under 30. And I see that that's where the movement is. I see that at the LA Art Show strongly. And I fly all over the world now to art fairs. I probably go to 20 art fairs a year all over. And I see that that's really where things are moving towards. I think that, and it could be a personal bias because of my passion towards historic material and that, but when I look at the contemporary world of material, I still feel strongly that the historic material holds up to it very well. And I think that it has a historical, the only reason it exists really is because people have collected it, cherished it, and passed it on. And if it wasn't for those collectors and people really saying this is something of value that I've enjoyed living with, it wouldn't still be here in the numbers that it is. And that's true of any historic thing. And my particular area of strongest interest is Native American material. So I think that those pieces will cycle back through. I used to always say that Native American material has never gone down in my lifetime. It's had spikes, like Apache baskets spiked up for a moment, or Germantown spiked up for a moment. But as an overall chart, Native American material had always gone up. And, several years ago, it kind of collapsed the marketplace and things went down.
Yes, 209 basically is when things change a lot, for a lot of things.
Yeah. And so that was the first time that in my lifetime, since I was 12, that I had seen that change. And I see that the marketplace is steady, kind of leveling off at this point. And, who knows what direction, but from my perspective, it's an amazing moment to actually buy some great things.
Yeah, I actually agree with that.
Because I think that those great things are always going to be great. And I don't know whether it's 3 years from now, probably at least 5 years from now, but at some point in the future, I think that these young collectors or people that are collecting contemporary art are going to want to expand out from that. I think that one reason for the Objects of Art show is that people come in and, as John Morris says, that they just buy one thing. They're not really a collector. They're more just decorating and finding something that's artistic merit and putting that with another piece that has artistic merit that they respond to. I believe that the collector gene that obviously I was born with and so many of us were born with, I don't think that that's gone from people. I mean, I think that some people are collecting other types of things, but I still think that that's out there. And I bet on, and I have bet on, that this historic material of note, at some point people will rediscover it. And it's certainly part of what my goal is to always introduce some of that into shows like the LA Art Show, to broaden people's horizon. And that's why we have these different sections at the LA Art Show, to showcase different types of material. And, there's certainly that art that's very hot right now that's selling for tens of millions, hundreds of millions.
Right.
And I think many people look only to that art world. And that's kind of what Frieze is about, Basel's about. And I think that that's very important. And I don't discredit them at all. But I do think that there's a whole nother world of art out there, from Aboriginal art from Australia to ink painting in Asia, which last 5 years at the LA Art Show we've really pushed, and last year we had a big selection of it, to American Indian material, to the things that you'll see at Objects of Art show. And I feel strongly about it that yes, you can try to play in that world of the $50 million to $100 million piece. And there are some spectacular pieces in that world. But when you really look at that world and you look at those pieces and you look at the pieces of an Aboriginal painting, an ink painting, even the ink painting Chibai Shur that's now $1 million from that $2,000, right? But in comparison, like the very best of something, I think that it's an exciting thing for people that are interested in art to broaden their horizons, to look beyond what just that niche group of people are looking at. Look at that, enjoy that, understand that, be part of that, love that, but broaden your horizons and come and look at American Indian or all of these other art forms that are being created all over the world that are spectacular. And I challenge any of those people or those art critics or those galleries to really look at what they're doing in those worlds and look at these other worlds and look at the price difference and really to have a serious conversation with me and say, oh, I have to dismiss all of this other material because it's not art.
Right. And all the history that goes with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so hopefully, and I think there is, a lane for a little 12-year-old boy or girl that might come in and see it and go, oh my gosh, this is just the greatest. Where's this all been my life?
Yeah. I think this is an incredibly exciting time for somebody young to look at this. And what I mean by young is 12, 13, 20s, in their 20s, 30s.
As a profession.
And look at this world and say, wow, like this material is amazing. It's actually at a point now that it's affordable. And look what I could do with this.
Yeah, you could be a leader in the field. You could be the next Kim Martindale by the time you're 32. Well, Kim, thank you so much for coming in. I know you're just exhausted and you're going to have to do everything, including sell and set up and do all this kind of stuff. But you're a really interesting human being, and I think you're very important to the Native American community, not only historic but contemporary. You get it. And we're really proud to have you on the show.
Well,
so
thank you so much for having me.
Go see one of the Martindale shows. I've been to all of them. I've been in all of them, I think, and they're really well run and they're vetted and they're just great stuff. Thanks,
and
Kim.
Thanks for those very kind words.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, Kim Martindale.
Appreciate it.
Cool. That was fun.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, and I guarantee you that went longer than an hour.
I do too.
I know for sure. It's about an hour and 20 minutes, I bet. We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.